Ah, we finally reached the spooky season, Larissa. Aren't you excited for Halloween?
Halloween?
Yeah, you do know what Halloween is, right?
Bien sûr que je sais ce que c'est Halloween. Tout être provenant du vide sait ce que c'est.
Oh, well, last time I was celebrating a holiday, you kinda acted like you didn't know what those were.
C'est car je ne savais pas ce que c'était le Mexique. Elle nous fait nous habiller pour ses stupides vacances. À chaque fois qu'elle remarque que c'est ce moment de l'année. On est des métamorphes. On n'a pas besoin de costumes.
But doesn't that kind of ruin the point? Like, yeah, sure, you can turn into whatever you want, but the whole point isn't becoming what you dress up as. It's to channel it and have fun with it, no?
Tu sonnes juste comme elle. Enfin bref, je vais y aller, vu que j'en ai rien à faire de ce qui se passe ici.
Hey Larissa, before you go, I got a chore for you to do.
Bien sûr que tu en as. Qu'est-ce que c'est?
I need you to go to somewhere else and bring me what's on this list.
C'est juste une liste de bonbons et d'autres confiseries.
I know, but they are special candies and sweet treats.
Très bien. Je reviens dans un moment.
Oh, and you have to do it while wearing a costume, and you have to get them via trick-or-treating.
Quoi?
You heard me.
Tu te moques de moi?
You wanted off this video while I talked about this video game. So you either stay and help me, or you get the trick-or-treating.
Je te déteste.
I know. Now off you go. And while that is happening, I want you all to know that I love talking about obscure stuff. Games, shows, movies, comics, anything unknown is gold to me. And if you're looking for obscure stuff, look no further than Sony's handheld consoles. The PSP, or the PSP for the cats in the audience, is a console that a lot of people have attachment to. And while I was a DS kid growing up, I always thought that the PSP was really cool. So cool in fact that when its hotter successor, the PS Vita, came out, I snatched that shit as soon as I could. Now the PSP had a lot of great games. So many in fact that I will definitely take a look at some of them some other time. But since it's the spooky season, I want to talk about Deadhead Fred, released on 2007, developed by Vicious Cycle Software, and published by D3. Well, this will be a bit depressing. Like I mentioned a few seconds ago, DHF was made by Vicious Cycle Software, a company that is known for making licensed games and a few original games on the side. However, what I am certain most of you will recognize them for is for making the Pac-Man Ghostly Adventures video games. They may not have done it, but they surely helped the Pac to be back. In 2007, they were acquired by D3 Publisher, a subsidiary of Bandai Namco, who have published just so many things. The main things you may recognize being the Earth Defense Force series, more licensed games here and there, the Onichabara series, and their most recent game. Yeah, you want those games, right? So here you go! Let's see you clear them! It's gotta be like the most violent title I've ever seen a game have. The development history of DHF is rather interesting. Made with the Vicious engine, a game engine made to create games across all consoles at the time, the game was conceived at first as Geo, and the protagonist looked like this. Damn, puberty hit this motherfucker really hard. The premise of Geo was that he was trying to save his world from this one evil king trying to destroy it. His main ability was being able to switch his head's shape in order to solve puzzles, fight, and traverse levels. Unfortunately, when Vicious Cycle showed off the game to potential publishers, they all kind of agreed that the game looked gay and like edutainment, and they were looking for something more mature and epic. So they went back to the drawing board and decided to change everything about the game, except for the head switching mechanic. That shit was so good that even the publishers that rejected the game agreed it was based and cool. So now they had a new direction. A dark noir story with a vengeful detective as its main character. They then went to Massive Black Studios to develop initial character sketches. After sending those sketches to a focus group and all agreeing that they liked the dark and fucked up protagonist, they then began to develop what would become DHF. They sent what they had so far to testers, and they added what was asked for the game, improving the combat and camera, adding more RPG elements, and even adding some more minigames. But I will talk about that later, don't you worry. Sadly, even though Vicious Cycle was cool and based and tried their best to make games for everyone to enjoy, they still went defunct in 2016, with their last games being Adventure Time Finn and Jake Investigations and Kung Fu Panda, Showdown of Legendary Legends. Oof. So that was the history of the developer. But what is the game's story that required such a massive change? Well, time to get bloody. Deadhead Fred follows a guy named Fred Newman, a private dick who's trying to uncover the secret dealings of this mysterious benefactor that recently arrived to his hometown of Hope Falls, Ulysses S. Pitt. Unfortunately, right before he could expose Pitt's corruption, Fred got whacked and left for dead, with Pitt asking to keep his head as a souvenir. Luckily for Fred, his body and brain were picked up by Dr. Steiner, a scientist who was sick of working under Pitt. The good doctor reanimated Fred's corpse to help him put an end to Pitt's reign. Fred, however, wasn't a fan of his new look, but with a new head on his shoulders, and a chip on them too, he decided to pick up where he left off and expose Pitt, and also regain his memory. Turns out when you die, you kinda lose your memories of the days before your death. Who knew? So that's the plot. It's a horror mystery with bits of action and dark comedy. If that's something that catches your eye, then definitely pick this up. I'd say this game is akin to a lot of shows and games from around the time. You know, stuff like Invader Sim, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Death Jr., whatever other hot topic merch of the time you could think of. I'm convinced that if this game became popular, Fred could have become a Tumblr sexy man. I mean, look at him. Doesn't this design look like something weird woman would be into? Plus, his attitude is definitely something I can see attracting a lot of women. But I will save that for when we talk about the voice actors. For now, I want to talk about how this game plays. Oh boy, this will be long. Describing Deadhead Fred's gameplay is a bit of a headache because it does so much and frankly, some of it isn't great. It's a hodgepodge of genres and game styles, but I will do my due diligence when going over all of them. Saving the game's main gimmick till the end cause I actually think it's brilliant. Starting with the beat 'em up sections. These are the main thing you'll be doing. You are dropped inside of a room and you have to beat up every creature feature to progress. The combat in this game isn't particularly complex. You go up to someone and button mash until they die, simple enough. However, if you manage to execute an enemy by either staggering them enough to rip their heads off, or by performing a fatality on them, you are rewarded with rage points, these little red things over here. With these you are able to use a super move that causes extra damage and can even one-shot enemies. But this game isn't just punching good, oh no, there is also exploration. Now this is something interesting to dig into. Deadhead Fred is a bit of an open world game. You can explore all these areas at your own leisure and find secrets or find activities to do. I would say that DHF is a bit of a 3D Metroidvania since you're encouraged to visit old areas with new abilities to find rewards and even access secrets that you weren't able to see when you first went through them. But Metroidvania is a stupid ass name, so I'll just call it an open world game with heavy emphasis on exploration. It's a mouthful, but hey, at least it's not gonna get people comparing this game to fucking garbage like this. Speaking of garbage, there are platform sections in this game. I do not like the platform sections in this game. Fred isn't exactly someone I look at and think, yeah, that nigga can jump. So him having areas where he has to do exactly that aren't particularly fun to go through. When it's something as simple as stuff like this, it's a non-issue. However, there are parts in the game where you have to shrink down and boy do I fucking hate them. Which sucks because I love the idea of being small and jumping around on what is essentially a normal sized room. It's why the Toy Story games are so good. But here, not as much. The best way I could describe them is that Fred is too stiff. Rigor mortis is hitting my mans really hard. He isn't built for this type of game, which is why he's at his best when he's running around punching people and solving puzzles. Oh, and speaking of which, there is a bit of a puzzle solving aspect to this game, and I think it's fine. Though some of the puzzles genuinely made me lose my head a little bit and I had to look up a walkthrough to see what to do. Is it bad game design or am I just stupid? You decide. But while the puzzles were indeed a bit of a pain in the neck, sometimes the way that they integrated the main mechanic of the game was absolutely genius. And by that, I mean the head switching mechanic. Oh yeah, now we're getting into the good stuff. The name of this game isn't just a cute little rhyme. Thanks to being a freak, Fred can swap heads depending on what he needs at the time. You get new heads by decapitating 5 enemies in any new area you go to, and taking them to this guy, Sam Spade, who is a reference to Peter Lorre. If you're my age, you probably have seen this lovely mug referenced in old Looney Tunes cartoons. And if you're like, I don't know, 5, you saw him in a new episode of SpongeBob recently. Anyways, you have a pool of 8 heads to help you get through the game. Let's go through them one at a time. First, you have your jar head, the basic head, and the one you'll be using the most throughout the game. The corpse head allows you to blow some rancid smell at an opponent to stagger them, but it also allows you to either float in the air and give the good suck, storing liquids in your head and spitting them out. The bone head allows you to throw out your knives like claws, and it lets you climb up fleshy walls like a fucked up Spider-Man. The tiki head, also known as that fuck-ass mask Eustace wears to scare courage, lets you beat up people to death with a club, travel to a different dimension, create a decoy and shoot poison darts, and it might be a little bit offensive. I don't know, I'm not a Hawaiian, so I have no room to say anything on that regard. The stone head, or as I like to call it, the Olmeca, makes you big and strong, which lets you break through walls and press buttons on the floor. The scarecrow head lets you shoot crows at people, and you're impervious to fire. Yeah, I don't get it either. The mutant head lets you resist radiation poisoning, and it's generally fucked up and weird. Now those are the combat-based heads, but you also have stuff like the shrunken head that lets you become tiny and has all this shitty platform section, so it's easily the worst head and I hate it! And lastly, you have the mannequin head, which lets you walk around and the public won't be scared of your disgusting jar head. Although, if I'm being perfectly honest, if I saw a motherfucker wearing this on the street, I'd probably be more scared than if he was just a brain in a jar. The way that the game uses the head swap mechanic is absolutely amazing. During the combat bits, we have enemies that can only be finished off by certain heads. You can still kill them without changing heads, but you do miss out on the extra rage points you get by performing fatalities on them. Plus, some of the finishing moves in this are actually pretty raw. You can also upgrade them to do more stuff, but heads have other uses that have nothing to do with murder, like I mentioned in a few of their uses. Some heads can help you out with traversal, and some even let you to secrets or allow you to be in areas you weren't supposed to be in before. Without spoiling anything, my favorite bit was at the end, where you actually get to use all of your heads to beat the last area and defeat the final boss. Oh, but that's not all! On top of everything I've said up to this point, Deadhead Fred also has so much more in store. You can play billiards, pinball, be on a pie eating contest, bet on mutated cockfights, fishing, worm catching, do missions for people and get rewards, be on a coliseum. This game is basically Yakuza, but without Japan. The president of Vicious Cycle said it best.
So you're going to get anywhere from 15 to 20 hours of gameplay if you just played straight through the linear missions, or you're going to get 20 to 30 plus hours if you play all the side missions, side quests, and mini games.
Now, while I am very happy to say that I enjoyed a lot of this game, certain things do make it a bit hard to recommend. The combat isn't particularly mind-blowing, and the platform sections with the shrunken head are easily the worst part of the game. Plus, there are just certain things that would frustrate certain people who didn't have a guide on hand, since the game isn't great at explaining things. I'm looking at you! First and second part of the Headless Horseman boss fight, that one puzzle in the Moctezuma Casino, and this one bit at the power plant. So, in a sense, This game is also a bit of an adventure game, where you have to use your head and think about how to do certain things, and what can your arsenal of heads do. Speaking of heads, look at this cool cover of the game showcasing all of the heads in the game. What a great segue to talk about. God, this game has such a fucking rancid vibe, dude. I love it. The game's art was done by a shit ton of people. So many, in fact, that I will just leave their names here and move on. The style this game is going for is grotesque, but cool. You used to see this a ton back in the day, and it's something I definitely miss from this era of games and shows. While I like to make a few comparisons to other games, I think the way this game looks is very unique. The character designs are all so eye-catching, from the normal human characters to the freaks and monsters. Fred is easily the most striking character in the game. The jarhead and the suit really make him stand out from other protagonists at the time. But he isn't the only character I think looks great. I mentioned him earlier, but Sam Spade is an absolute freak of nature, and I love how he looks. Juju Judy, on top of looking sick as hell, is also a bad bitch, and we appreciate that in this house. Dr. Steiner looks great, but also looks dehydrated as fuck. Please somebody get my man a Dasani. And lastly, Ulysses S. Pitt looks as disgusting and as greasy as you'd expect a mobster to be. I love it. And now, I briefly want to talk about the game's multiple box arts. I mentioned it earlier, but the one showcasing the multiple heads is amazing. It has a mysterious and alluring vibe to it. This one where we see Fred's brain and eyes in the green fluid is also really well done. It makes you think that the game box is the jar, which is funny because they kind of have the same shape. And the last box art is, I think, probably the weakest one. It has some neat things like showcasing Fred himself, plus the little detail of the silhouettes of Fred wearing all of the different heads is actually pretty cool, but compared to the other two, it is the weakest one. Now, while the characters all look great, I frankly found myself loving the aesthetics of the environments a lot more. You have your typical spooky castle, but you also have spooky swamps, regular cities, rainy cities, fucked up cities, Oklahoma, Detroit, and even Half-Life. It's genuinely amazing how they made Hope Falls feel like such an interesting and lived-in environment. With all of these different areas you get to explore and interact with. Everything is fucked up and weird and gross, but I love that about it. Even the normal people you get to meet look not right. And that is so cool. I miss when games used to be unafraid to be ugly and weird. And while there's still games like that out there, I kinda miss this era of rancid grossness and weirdness. Now, I did talk about how the characters look, but being honest, they wouldn't have been as effective without their amazing voice actors. Oh, and speaking of which, DHF doesn't have an amazing soundtrack per se. Not that it's bad, far from it. I really like some of the music in it composed by Rod Abernethy and Jason Graves. But a lot of the songs feel like filler? Like they kind of just exist because we need something in the background while you pummel people into the ground. So, sadly, none of them really stuck with me other than the main theme. What will stick with me, though, are the vocal performances. Everyone in the voice cast was incredibly memorable and directed perfectly, even though a lot of them were just doing impressions. Or are just offensive. Maybe. Again, I'm not a part of these groups, so I don't know. Let's just go through some of my favorites before we get to the main man himself. Dr. Steiner, played by Jack Broth, is a very interesting kind of mad scientist. He isn't the type of doctor that cackles to himself and has evil plots. He is kind of a sweet old man that happens to be a bit eccentric and neurotic. Easily one of the better performances in the game. Juju Judy, played by Barbara Goodson, who you might know as the voice of Rita Repulsa from Power Rangers, Turbo Granny from Dandadan, and Prince Lahar from Disgaea, gives a pretty solid performance, giving Judy that voodoo allure that makes her, well, a bad bitch. The Headless Horseman, aka the most annoying boss fight in this whole game, is voiced by R. Martin Klein, who is in just a ton of shit, mostly anime. and he gives a fun little performance as this jackass character. And now we talk about the main header himself, Fred Newman. Fred is played by actor John C. McGinley, who most people will know for his role in the show Scrubs. Easily the best performance in the game. He's a massive fucking dickhead and a smartass, but you can't help but love him and want to see him succeed. Fred is such a dick, he even insults you, the player, every time you kill him. Genius.
Oh. Restart so I can waste this prick. See you after the respawn, fuckface. Damn you. Thank you so much for sucking. Great. Just great. New player, please.
So that were the character voices and the music done. But at the end of it all, what was the legacy of this game? And what did I think of it? Well, it's easy to look at a game like this and think it didn't make a big splash, but it was fairly well received by critics and the few people who played the game. It was nominated for a few awards, and it even won the first ever Writers Guild of America's award for video game writing. Not like it really matters though, since the category was discontinued in 2018. There were plans to port the game to the PlayStation Network and even the Xbox Live Arcade, but that never went anywhere. There were also plans for a sequel, which D3 were super interested in. Hell, Namco Bandai themselves were interested in it as well, and John was even up for reprising his role as Fred again, but as I mentioned before, Vicious Cycle closed its doors in 2016 and nothing ever happened. And sadly, the game is now completely stuck on the PSP, with no other official way to play this forgotten gem. Which means I don't have a way to recommend any alternatives for you to play this game. A shame. I usually hate these, but I wouldn't mind having a re-release or a remaster of Deadhead Fred for modern consoles. It would benefit from having a better camera, a second analog stick, and a touch-up to the graphics. However, I will only accept this if it gives you an option to switch between the new graphics and the old ones, Grim Fandango style, and to not censor anything about it. Yes, even the weird problematic things in it. Is there anything else? Well, there is this one skin in Fortnite that kinda looks like Fred, but that's about it. Motherfucker looking like deceased Noggin Frederick. But yeah, that was Deadhead Fred. A fun time for me with a few hiccups that, while they were annoying, didn't really detract from my enjoyment of this game. I highly recommend it if you have a PSP laying around and like $13 to spare. And hey, if this video can get enough of a buzz for the game to get a re-release, I'd be pretty happy about that. But anyways, that was that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Leave a comment telling me what you think and... Oh hey Larissa, how'd the trick-or-treating go?
Va te faire foutre.
Yeah, I guess I went a little bit overboard with that punishment. I'm sorry. Here, come have some candy with me and let's watch a horror movie.
Non merci, j'ai eu assez d'horreur pour ce soir.
Oh, come on, please. I know you enjoy caramel and marshmallows.
Comment tu...
She told me.
Ah, bien, mais tu ne me lorgnes pas pendant que je porte ça. Et je veux le chocolat qui sert.
Of course.